Is anything really underrated? With the World Wide Web at our fingertips, everything imaginable has a fan base. It doesn't matter if it's mediocre or if it's the most offensive thing ever made. Anyways, on a completely unrelated note, here's what's, in my opinion, are the top 5 underrated / overlooked games. Of course, the list is in no specific order because I am incredibly indecisive. This video is just basically a bunch of recommendations for some games that I think that are great, but just don't get played enough. Quick side note, I'm sick, so if you're new to this channel, this is not what I sound like. I'm usually higher energy, but anyways, let's stop stalling and let's fucking kick it.
5.
This one is iffy. Mirror's Edge is a key example of greater than the sum of its parts. On paper, its concept is great. An aesthetically minimalist game with first-person parkour gameplay that's entirely focused on speed. So much to the point where it's more like a racing platformer than a linear first-person adventure. But in practice, it's more like never-ending trial and error where just one little fuck-up can make your complete run forfeit. You're constantly going to fail. Not because the game is hard necessarily, but because the momentum and the wall running are so damn tricky. When you have a level down like the back of your hand, the platforming is a breeze. But just getting to that point can take hours and hours of failure, I kid you not. And even when you do get that down, there's the combat added on top of it, which is shitty all around and just brings this momentum-based game to a screeching halt. Attacking feels like it does nothing, guns feel like they're shooting air, and even on easy, you can die in like 3 hits. Characters are pretty non-existent, including the main one herself, Faith Connors. There's a murder mystery that this game's story is focused around, and there's an obvious twist that has little to no repercussions on anything, honestly. Really, if this game was mostly silent, save for the sound of the bustling city and the music, I think it would have worked better alongside the art style. Gee, this sure is a really strong start to a video about underrated games. I love Mirror's Edge, I promise. And while I said this video isn't in any specific order because it really isn't, it's kind of fitting that Mirror's Edge is at the bottom. Because while I can't deny that Mirror's Edge has issues, I still love it. Mirror's Edge is meant to be played with patience. It's a game that's meant to be learned. That trial and error will never stop with this game. Even after 3 playthroughs, I still have my moments. The game can be frustrating but not defeating. The combat is janky, but it's only used in short bursts. The missions are exciting and aren't long at all, so learning them in order to achieve the shortest run isn't too overbearing. The concept art and CGI renders are hands down some of my favorite works of art ever, and I don't just mean art like as a general concept, but as an actual medium of artwork. Looking at all of this while listening to Solarfield's amazing soundtrack makes me feel something that I can't really explain. And I felt the exact same way when I was playing the game. If I take Mirror's Edge apart piece by piece and look at every single part individually, then yeah, it isn't the best. You can even make the argument that it's not even good sometimes. But if you step back and look at the big picture, if you look at the entire elephant, then you'll realize that some things just deserve to be left as is. To be entirely honest, I'm not really sure if I'd want Mirror's Edge any other way. There is a 2016 reboot that is almost like a completely different game. I haven't played it, but apparently it has an open world, side missions, the usage of guns have been removed entirely, Faith has gadgets, and she also does finishers in third person. I really don't think that the original game was that bad and that the very concept needed to go back to the drawing board. As is, it's a pretty great, but short and mildly frustrating game. It's a testament to what the first-person perspective could do besides the everyday shooter or racing game. And may I add, it was only made in 2 years when most games need at least 3. Could the game have used that extra development time? Possibly, probably, yes. Yeah, it definitely could have. As of now, Faith Connors and the beautiful city that she inhabits are like a memory stuck in my brain that I don't ever want to leave.
Four.
Developed by Platinum Games and directed by the man who was so scared of horror that he created Resident Evil, that's not bullshit, look it up, comes Vanquish, a third-person shooter that is anime as fuck. Automatically, if you like Platinum Games' style and gameplay, then you should already own Vanquish. No ifs, ands, or buts. For a game with Shinji Mikami in the director's chair, you'd think that this would be a top seller, but Bayonetta from Hideki Kamiya, who is also Capcom alumni, ended up being the more popular title from Platinum. platinum from that time period, getting countless re-releases, an anime film, as well as even 2 sequels. Obviously, that doesn't mean that Vanquish is bad. It's a third-person shooter with that Platinum Games flair. It's fast, flashy, has smooth controls, and is incredibly replayable. The main character, Sam, is an action movie protagonist through and through. I am not convinced that they didn't just reuse concept art from this for Metal Gear Rising. The entire plot is extremely cheesy and enjoyable in a really fun 80s video gamey way. I mean, the villain is Russia? Not people from Russia, not a Russian group, just the entire country. I'm playing the PlayStation 4 remaster and it still holds up 11 years later in terms of audio and visuals. Frame rate's extremely smooth, which is really important in a game like this. Characters still look pretty good despite being from the era of hyper-realism that really doesn't hold up. And the soundtrack is A1 barbecue sauce, but it's platinum, so what the fuck were you expecting? And I don't know what else to tell you. If you like Platinum Games stuff, more specifically their original IPs from the days when they were published by Sega, then buy it. You should definitely get the 2-pack remaster for PS4 and Xbox One, since it includes Bayonetta, which is another fantastic Platinum title. Vanquish. It's short, but the gameplay is so damn good that it's worth the price of admission. Speaking of admission, ad break! Hey, do you like this video? Then hit the like button and subscribe. It's free and it helps me a ton. Here on this channel, I talk about a wide variety of games from shooters to RPGs. But I also talk about anime, because of course I would. What the fuck do you think I am? And movies too, sometimes, kind of, just not all that often. Anyways, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss anything when it comes out. Back to the show.
3,
Triple D didn't deserve this much hate. Wait, 3D... Oh, I get it, Nomura, you sly dog. For some reason, Dream Drop Distance is one of the most hated entries in the Kingdom Hearts franchise, alongside other games that were originally Nintendo handheld exclusives. Coincidence? No. In all seriousness, I think there's a few specific things that caused people to hate Dream Drop Distance when it came out, with the biggest and most obvious thing being that this was just another game being released instead of Kingdom Hearts 3, when this was intended to be just like Chain of Memories, an interlude that introduces new overarching plot points for the next big Kingdom Hearts title. Unfortunately, when 3D was released, it had been 7 years since Kingdom Hearts 2, which only took 3 years to release after the original game. Add on top of that about 5 different titles came out within that 7-year gap, and it still took another 7 years for KH3 to come out, with Dream Drop Distance being the most recent big installment. Sure, there were the key titles as well as BBS 0.2, but the last big Kingdom Hearts game was this 3DS title that introduces shady time travel. For the record, none of this stuff really ever bothered me, but I just wanted to give context as to why some people may have hated this game. And when I say hated, I mean hated. Another possible reason is that this game was developed by the Osaka team. TLDR, the Square Enix Osaka team has made a lot of Kingdom Hearts games, but they most notably developed Birth by Sleep, which introduced the customizable deck that is also used in Dream Drop Distance. Overall, their gameplay is pretty different from the Tokyo team who made Kingdom Hearts 1 and 2, with the most notable complaint against the Osaka team is that their games are floaty. The games are also easy to break as well, especially the ones with the customizable decks, which is why there's a large amount of fans who dislike these games. And from here on out, they've been the main developers for the franchise. Personally, I was never bothered by this stuff. Even after learning that like half the games were made by a completely different team and replaying them, I still enjoy all of them. Yes, you can break the Osaka games relatively easy, but if that's the criteria for a game being completely and utterly terrible, then there is a ridiculous amount of games that should be on that same shit list. Look, if you think 3D is bad, then that's fine. But to me personally, it was just another fun interlude, much like Calm before it and Mom after it. Am I biased because I played this game for a week and a half straight in high school after recovering from a surgery? Shit, maybe. But regardless of that, I still really love Dream Drop Distance. The worlds have the size and scopes of Kingdom Hearts 2. It has a ridiculously complicated story that we all love, some great new tracks, completely new Disney properties, and old-fashioned Kingdom Hearts gameplay with some new changes along the way. And all of this was on the 3DS. I don't think it's perfect, and I'm not expecting anyone to change their minds on this game whatsoever, but now that Kingdom Hearts 3 was released years ago and we've gone far past that, maybe you could give this game a second chance. Just maybe.
2,
From the director of Devil May Cry 2, 3, 4, and 5 comes Dragon's Dogma, also known as that one JRPG your buddy won't shut the fuck up about. I constantly got this game mixed up with Dragon Age, which is honestly why I never touched it or even learned anything about it. Gotta be honest, not really into fantasy all that much. I'm more of a sci-fi kind of guy, which is a big reason why I just couldn't get into Oblivion. Lots of these games have the same drab look as well as share similar tropes and storylines. Is it a generalization? Yeah. But what are you gonna do about it? Thankfully, Dragon's Dogma puts all these preconceived notions to rest. The game takes inspiration from both Eastern and Western RPGs to create a really enjoyable game with lots of innovative ideas, with a fair share that also does its part to hold the game back. I started writing this video when I began my playthrough, and over the course of production, I finished my playthrough. Now, because of that, you may think that I've had to rewrite this section multiple times, but despite some opinions about the ending, which I won't get into here for obvious reasons, I still felt the exact same way about Dragon's Dogma from beginning to end. Is that a bad thing? That's for you to decide for yourself. Personally, I'm more indifferent to it. When it comes to gameplay, it plays more like a character action game than a JRPG, which is understandable when you remember that this is the same guy who made Devil May Cry popular. Listen, I know Hideki Kamiya made it, but I'm just saying, Hideaki Itsuno put the work in. He had the arc. He started with DMC 2, but he also made DMC 5, so tit for tat. But that's just when it comes to combat. Everything else plays like a standard Japanese role-playing game. Open world map, tons of different roles or vocations for your main characters, a fucking ridiculous amount of fetch quests, fighting bigger and bigger bosses, the usual. Or as the kids say nowadays, the huge. However, the map is incredibly small, yet ridiculously barren, and anything interesting from NPCs to large bosses are few and far between. You're mostly going to be fighting the same group of enemies that spawn in the exact same place for the entirety of the game. So, if running back and forth down the same small map and fighting the same enemies over and over again doesn't bother you, then go nuts. What's so new about this game are mechanics like the pawns, which are player-created companions who can be shared with other players and vice versa, almost like a medieval wife swap. Does anybody even remember that show? Am I the only one? You can romance any NPC in the game, and I mean any. Now hold your fucking horses, this isn't like in Persona where you make a conscious decision to date this person. It's an automated choice that's done through an invisible affinity system, which can lead to players accidentally being in relationships with random characters instead of who they actually wanted to be with, which is already frustrating enough. But you can't romance the pawn that you made at the beginning of the game. What the hell? Are you telling me that I put all this work into making this character for no damn reason? I like Dogma's story, world, and especially its lore, but the way it's told isn't the best. You get story stuff in between doing unrelated missions from the main goal of the entire game, which is killing the fucking dragon. There's a bit of Return of the King syndrome, where it feels like the game just constantly keeps giving you fake out endings for like 5 hours, but when it's all said and done, it's a satisfying and straightforward ending to a decent 30 or so hour campaign. And there is New Game Plus as well, which does have some story relevance, but that's all I'll say. The only problem is that the monotonous gameplay kinda throws a wrench in how cool New Game Plus is story-wise. Even then, the cool stuff is just in cutscenes, there's no new gameplay stuff whatsoever. However, I am playing the Dark Arisen re-release on 360, which includes the extremely hard Bitter Black Isle expansion, so there is that, and all this for only $6. This game's held up relatively well for being released on a 16-year-old console. There is that super drab look with tons of browns, grays, and greens, but my biggest problem is also the most obvious one, that being the cinematic bars on the top and bottom of the screen, which were removed in the, at the time, next-gen releases. I highly suggest that you get it on one of those consoles or on PC if these bars bother you as much as they bother me, but since this is an RPG, I have to give my top recommendation to the Switch release because you can play it on the toilet. That is, if the frame rate and visual stuff doesn't bother you as much, I don't really give a shit. You're pretty much getting a similar experience to the, at the time, last-gen stuff while also being able to play it anywhere. This section is ridiculously long, so I'm just gonna wrap it up. If you like fantasy RPGs like the Elder Scrolls, but have always wanted to flesh out into more action-focused Japanese stuff, or vice versa, then this is probably your best bet. Hideaki Itsuno is an amazing director, so regardless of what happens to DMC in the future, I think that he's more than earned a chance to make a sequel to Dragon's Dogma like he wants to. Apparently, only about 60 to 70% of what the team wanted to be in the game actually made it, which explains a lot. Even if this game is just a proof of concept, it's pretty damn good despite all of its flaws. Hopefully we can date pawns in the sequel. And now, here are some honorable mentions that didn't make the cut because I like a lot of video games, go figure.
One.
And ladies and gents, germs and worms, my obvious number one pick is Akiba's Trip, Undead, and
Cover mechanic, right?
Y'all did this game dirty. Sunset Overdrive was released as an Xbox One console exclusive back near its launch, aka back when Insomniac was a third-party developer, and when Xbox was the red-headed stepchild of the generation. I mean sure, the Wii U wasn't all that great in retrospect, but at least you weren't forced to have a Kinect and you could actually play used games. Also, I love my Wii U, fuck you. Unfortunately, Sunset was a casualty of this cluster truck, regardless of its PC release 4 years later, which is how I'm playing this game. It's a real shame because it's one of the most satisfying original IPs of the last generation. You don't even have to be a sucker for the punk style like I am to adore how this game looks and sounds, not to mention how it plays. The traversal is some of the best I've seen in a non-superhero title, which makes a lot of sense when you remember that Insomniac makes Spider-Man. Sure, the shooting is a little stiff, the missions aren't that varied and eventually become a little bit monotonous towards the end, and the humor can be kind of really hit or miss. If you like Seth Rogen movies or if you laugh at Facebook Deadpool memes, this is probably your thing. Like, no offense, if that's your humor, but it's just not mine. Some of it is pretty funny, but a lot of it comes off as trying just a little too hard. But then again, I laugh at my own jokes, so who the hell am I to say anything? Overdrive really succeeds when it doesn't have to worry about being funny and just is. It's a zombie game that tries its best to have fun, instead of sticking with the dire and depressing attitude that the genre's just been stuck with for decades. There's just something about Insomniac games that are very enjoyable and addicting, like they're candy for the hands and the eyes. Specifically their open world games. The traversal mechanics working alongside the beautifully rendered Sunset City with some great music playing is a huge part of that. The only thing that rustles my feathers the wrong way is that the story left off on a cliffhanger. Why? Like sure, sequel bait me. Sequel bait me all the live long day. But giving me an incomplete story is a huge no-no. But then again, this game was extremely self-aware to the point where it really didn't care about the actual narrative or character arcs, it cared more about making bad jokes, to the point where it even rivaled the Deadpool video game. Will we ever see another re-release or a sequel to complete the story? Probably, definitely, definitively not. I'm not too sure, but I don't think this game sold all that well, despite the re-release on Steam. Even if it sold like gangbusters, Insomniac hasn't even mentioned it since long before the Sony buyout, and I really don't see them putting down Ratchet & Clank as well as Spider-Man 2 just to make a Sunset Overdrive sequel. But do not let that discourage you from playing this. If you liked Infamous, or more importantly, if you liked the PS4 Spider-Man games, then Sunset Overdrive is quite literally made for you. The game can be bought for a measly $7 on Xbox One and $20 on Steam, and I'd say that it's a must-buy for both of the platforms it's been released on. And believe me, if a sequel is eventually announced, you'll definitely be hearing from me again.
Not me? Oh, you! Can you survive the many dangers? Can you help others survive? Can you save Sunset City? Can you? For the love of God, can you? Of course you can. It's a f***ing video game.